So the question, I had a question about how it works when we change the configuration. What's the effect on the generated container, or how it works? Where is the factory for the cache service? That was your question. When we change from file system to Redis. So I can show you. Let me just do this. So I'm just jumping exactly where we were before. Lunch. So I'm just commenting another time here. So now we are back to the file system as a backend for a cache item. You know the cache clear command, so I'm just running cache clear right now. I'm doing something which is snapshotting the cache folder and especially the container folder. So when you change the configuration, when you do any change that can affect the way services are wired together, we create a new container. So in this case, there's one legacy for technical reason, and the name is random for the last part. So now we are Symfony created this folder for us. I'm just moving it, not copying at least, copying it to snapshot it locally, just to show you a property which is this one. So I'm just running the same command several times. And in the container, so we still have the exact same name. The legacy one has disappeared because it's not needed the second time. It's needed the first time because this is the container that is used while we're running the cache clear command, and we cannot kill the services that provide the current command. So at this point, we were running with the legacy container. Now we have the fresh one, it's ready. There's a property there. I don't know if you wondered about that before. It was not the case until Symfony 3.4. Now the container is idempotent. So for the same set of configuration, you get the exact same container. It means we used to have things that did change between each run of the cache clear command. We used to create a different container every single time. The reason was that the container used to contain some random numbers. Okay? So now there's a property of the dumped container, which is that, yes, the term is reproducible. So you reproduce the container and the same exact container every single time you run the cache clear command. This is nice because it means you can validate a container and it won't change if you don't change the configuration. There is something which is called reproducible builds. What's that? No, thank you. What's that? Anyway, okay. So this is a best practice, a low-level best practice. I don't know if you will work with it directly. There is this website which explains why we should seek for reproducible builds. So Symfony is part of the IDE. We are listed there. So it's a property, it's this property of being able to create the exact same compiled application from the same source code, so that there is a map between the source to the dump container. I'm not going to spend much time on this. It's totally independent from the technology, the concept and the idea. So if you want to read about it, I invite you to just read this page. It's like a manifesto. So you've read about Semver. So Semver is a manifesto we're using every day. It's obvious now was a good idea. This is still a good idea. Another one is the 12 factors manifesto. So this is about using environment variables to configure the application, any application in any technology. So this is another thing you need to read. And then there is the third of this kind is this one. It's quite new, so you might want to read it. So we are part of it. The Symfony container is reproducible, which means that now what I'm going to do is re-enable Redis as a backend. I'm going to clear the cache twice just to remove the legacy folder, and now have this var cache dev container. Now, as you can see, it's not b something, it's 6 something there. It used to be b, j, z, etc. And it changed because the configuration changed. So we are sure that there is a difference between this one and the previous one. This container folder has many files in it. Okay? And each file is a factory, is the code that holds, it's a class. Yes, no, it's not a class, actually. Let's open one. It's the code that is needed to create a service. So this one creates the console.common.cache warmup service. And this one is created by creating an instance of this class and passing it a dependency, which is the cache warmer, it looks like, which is loaded from this file. We also include the classes and the files that contain the class definition, so that we don't use auto loading for this because we don't need to, because we know at compile time which files are going to be needed. Yeah. So if you have any question about that, you can ask. If not, let's continue. But basically, this is the kind of code you could have written yourself if you were to define your services manually. If you were to use all the classes that are in Symfony, to create this one, you would need to just do this, new something. Now let's get the cache warmer from where it is, pass it in the constructor, and so on. Every single service is just like that. Those are just, including. So it looks like, old code like we used to write before auto-loading was available and before we had frameworks. That's the job of the framework, to create this for you now. So what I wanted to show you is this. We have two containers. So the previous one is still around, and the new one, Meld, is some tool to make a difference, to see the difference. There are no differences for these files, so the difference is somewhere else. So now it's there. So there's this file at the bottom. So as you can see, it didn't impact any file. We don't have any new file. We don't have, except this one. And if we open this one, so the namespace is a difference. There's another difference there. As you can, I don't know if you can read it. Maybe I can zoom. No, I cannot. Can you read? Yeah? Okay. So on the left, we have file system things. They are not anymore on the right side. Instead, we have two things, Redis thread, Redis adapter, which is nice. It maps to what we did. We just switched from file system to Redis. It's visible in the dumped code. We don't need the file system classes anymore. We use Redis instead. And then we have this, and this is the only other change. And as you can see on the left, we create an instance of some file system adapter, which gets a directory as a parameter there. And on the other side, we create an instance of Redis adapter, which should be the implementation of the Redis driver. And we pass it a connection created by a factory, which gets the URL of the Redis thing and some arguments. That's it. So basically, every change you do in the configuration has some effect on the dumped container, like this one. And that's how it works. And if sometimes it's useful to open this kind of files. These files are generated, but you can read them, and you can this way better understand how things eventually end up being created for you by Symfony. This is the code that runs. There's nothing else. Okay? So just some. So let me remove that. So let's create some entity. Let's do a repository. Let's do this kind of things just to continue. Okay? Bin console make entity. Great. So missing package, make entity. Are you all able to do that, or is someone lagging behind and needs some help to catch up somehow? Tell me if you want to practice and you can't because there's something blocking you. Tell me. So ORM is again an alias that is known by Flex, and Flex is going to resolve that to the ORM pack, as you can see. The ORM pack, so a pack is just a list of dependencies you can use instead of listing all dependencies. It's a group of dependencies. So now, and it's also a repository. Let me show you. So GitHub Symfony ORM pack. So this repository, Symfony ORM pack, there is just one composer.json file, which is of type Symfony pack, and it will install this for you. So you don't have to type 3 things, you just need 1. That's the benefit. So now it's done, we downloaded the files, everything is installed, so we got some dependencies of doctrine itself, so we have everything ready. Flex did some configuration for us, so it added something for the cache bundle, the doctrine bundle, and the migration bundle. And now it's telling us that I need to configure the database URL in .env, which for now is using MySQL 5.7. Okay, so let's open that. On my machine, I'm going to use SQLite. If you want to use MySQL, you can. If you want to use SQLite and you have it, fine. That's perfect. If you need to tweak that, do it now. So it means I'm going to do that because I don't have MySQL there, and I just need this one. So these are all the things that were added by Flex when installing Doctrine Bundle again, and now we're going to use that as the database URL in this local thing. Okay, no problem with that. So if you want to do the same, you can. It's just copy-paste from the documentation. So this is an environment variable, which means at this stage it's a plain string, and this part of the string, I'm sure you understand that it's a placeholder for the project dir parameter, but Symfony has no clue about that. Yet it has, because there is something in the configuration that tells it to look for this. So let's look at the changes, and let's look at this new file that were created. So now if you've done that, you should have, let's say, this doctrine YAML file. And the doctrine YAML file configures this. So there is a parameter. This is the default value for the database URL. So if you By default, if you use an environment variable, but it's not defined, you'll get an exception. If you want the exception to disappear, then you can define a default value for some environment variable, and this is the way to do it. So this creates a parameter which has this env prefix, and you give it an empty value there. So I don't need that. So I'm going to remove also this part because the URL is enough. And this is enough for now in my case. If you're using MySQL, you can keep the lines before. So this part of the env parameter tells Symfony to process the value of the database URL environment variable and to replace placeholders by their actual value. So that's why this person kernel.parameter_dir is resolved to the actual project directory. There are more processors like that. We can play with that together later. Okay? Then the rest is just the default that works well with the kind of application we're going to use, which means loading annotations for every entity that should be put in the source entity subfolder, which means namespace also. That's why we have this prefix. The alias app is because we use app as our namespace, so we are going to use these defaults. They are going to work well. So as far as best practice is concerned, just use that and use annotations for your entities. It works well. It's local, so it's easy to figure out how your entity mapped to the database, and so on. So yes, I need to save that. So I just added that. Yes. Let me show you a comment you might not know, or maybe you do. It's composer. So just before we did, let me just show you the issue. So we did that. We run that. And when we run that, we ask composer to add this line. Yes? That's what we did. So then it figured out that it needed more dependencies because of transitivity. Now, a best practice would be to adopt the dependencies, your main dependencies, in your composer JSON file. It means in your own composer JSON file, you should list the dependencies that you are using in your application. Let's say Twig, for example. Right now, we are relying on Twig, but it's completely implicit. And it's worse than that. It's that Twig comes because of the debug pack. Okay? And it comes only in required dev. So our application right now is just broken because Twig is installed only in dev. So the best practice is to composer require Twig. Now I'm going to add Twig to my composer JSON file, and we already have it, but it's still needed to adopt and to list Twig explicitly. So in fact, Twig is mapped to Twig bundle because when we add Twig bundle, it means we want Twig plus the configuration system to make Twig work in our bundle system. So now, nice. We adopted, I'm using this term right, our thing, yeah. So yes, I want that, and everything in the log file. So I have Twig. The same can be told about that. So the Unpack means we are going to use Doctrine and also the Doctrine bundle. So let's adopt the dependencies related to Doctrine. How can I do that? Does anyone know? Yes. So we are going to use that command. So unpack is a command that is provided by Flex. And what it does is that it replaces the pack by what it contains. So it will look at the dependencies listed in the pack, and it will put them instead in your JSON file. Exactly what is visible now. So we remove the pack, and we are listing now instead what it contains explicitly. Okay? So don't forget to use that if you want to adopt your dependencies. It would be better. I would say yes. So you can do it in one step, which would be composer require unpack ORM. If you do that, it means you know it's a pack, you know how it resolves. So usually you will discover that it's a pack by requiring the alias, and then you can unpack in the second step. Yeah. So I would recommend to unpack your dependencies when you want to be more, you want to have cleaner and more explicit dependencies, yes. Now, if you want to be quick for a small application, it's fine to use the pack. Yeah.
I can understand that part being explicit about your own dependency. That one I can understand. But the second part about the unpacking, this makes us the whole concept of the Symfony receipts useless.
Why so? Why do you think so? Why does it make the recipes?
Then at the end we will have a lot of packages that we don't know why they are there.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, maybe we don't get any idea why are they there.
Yeah, but
to have Symfony ORM when I don't know what's happening in the background.
okay. It all depends on how you see that, because when you are using the ORM pack, maybe it's nice because you see that there's a group of dependencies, but then maybe you have less control over which exact version of Doctrine is used, because the pack decides, you don't decide. So if you want to have finer control of the exact version of the bundle or of Doctrine itself or something else, you'll need to manage the dependencies yourself. So that's one part of the answer. Yeah. And then about Flex and recipes, there are some recipes that are bound to a pack, but these are very special recipes. Most recipes are bound to the actual package. So you can install the 3 directly and get the same recipes installed. You don't need to get via the pack, to use the pack to get the recipes applied, to have the recipes applied. That's why. Yeah. So now I have ORM. I can run my command again. Make entity. Okay. Previously, when I run composer make controller, I added the name of the controller at the end. I want now to use interactivity, so let me just borrow from this. It didn't refresh. It's locked in small screen mode. So let's continue. So this one is doing a comment. We can do that later. We already did that. Annotation, git commit, twig, we just did that. The debug pack done. Make entity, composer require ORM, okay. So, as you can see, we already did that. I already told you about that. Okay, so city highlights. Let's name it this way. Up. What happened? So, property name, let's give it a name, type string, field length, we don't care. Can this field be null in the database? No. Do I want anything else? No. When you're ready, create a migration with make migration. Great. So now we can, so we do have 2 new files. One is the entity file, which already has the proper annotation for the repository class. this annotation with the ID, with the name we created, with the type and so on, getters and setters for the properties. So that's great. That's easy. We didn't have to do it. For the repository, it's in the repository subnamespace. So now we have city highlight repository. So again, so as you can see, there are things you maybe don't do, but are nice adding if you know. So here we have this repository. I don't know if you've read about this one, service entity repository. Who knows about that? Service entity repository? Okay, so it's a new feature of Doctrine Bundle 1.8. And there is a base class in Doctrine Bundle, which is this one, of course. And the service entity repository is a base class that allows you to have repositories as a service, as services. So you can declare repository as services. And it doesn't have the drawback that the base repository class has when the one that is shipped by Doctrine itself, which is that you have sometimes errors like the entity manager is closed, things like that. When there is error management, you have an object, in fact, which is the entity manager, which should not be injected directly in the repository. There should be some indirection into it. So anyway, repositories as services work great now, thanks to this base class provided by the bundle. So the best practice is to make your repositories, extend it. To extend it, you need to do that. You need to create a constructor which will get the registry, or the registry is this from the Doctrine Bridge. The registry is an entity manager registry. So instead of injecting the entity manager directly, we inject the registry, which is free from this issue with injecting the entity manager directly. And there is something which we need to do, which is done by magic in the base class, and doesn't need any magic, and shouldn't need any magic. So we now pass explicitly the name of the entity that is bound to the repository, so that we have more information and we can run better. So now we have a class here that contains some, These are examples. If you want to find one by some field, we can uncomment that and tweak it to our needs. Of course, the repository is something you need to tweak because you are going to put your domain queries there. So, from the base service repository, we have the find by one, the find all, and the find by method that are already implemented. Right? Why do we need this? Maybe it's obvious, maybe it's not. Why do you think we added this? Yes, type hinting. So now if we type in this repository and we call the find method, we are telling to PHP Storm that this will return a city highlight, which is something that the base class cannot know. So we add more things for auto-suggestion, which is nice. So thanks to the code generation, we learned about that. So, okay. So that's nice. I'm going to, let's say, commit for now. What's that? Add ORM. Add city. Okay, I have this. Nice. So, next step. So we did the entity. So we have this. Now, we are not going to tweak the entity, but you could. Let's create a migration. The migration will allow us to create the database schema for us. So this is, so the make migration command created for us the migration. So review the new migration, this one. So let's review it. What this does is that it created something for SQLite, that's for me, and it is creating a table which is called city highlight with a name column and an ID column in it. And if we want to downgrade, we drop the table. Fine, this is exactly what we need to run. So let's add it. And now let's run the migration. Yes, I want to do it. Done. So now we created the database. Let's use it. What's this? Let me catch up with my notes. Okay, let's continue. So we're there. Let's say I want a description. So the maker bundle is able to update this. Where is it? Oh no, sorry. So let's do it again. Make entity. Can I? So what was the name? Your entity already exists. Let's add some new fields. Description. Yes, a string. Okay, let's keep it short. Nice. No. Okay. The file was patched, and now we have a new description, and we have a getter and a setter. Cool. We also, okay, we can commit that. We can create the migration again. So now, sorry. We have a new migration file, which contains the migration to create the table. Fine. I'm adding it also, and I'm running the migration, not this one. Aha. Okay, I missed something on the description. Where's the default value? Ah, what happened? Why is it not nullable? Okay, just borrow from it. Nullable. I missed adding this on the description field. Okay. So I'm going to remove that. Better. Cool. Let's continue with this, adding fixtures. So make fixtures. Okay, another package we need to install. Cool. So now I can run the command again. Okay. Open your new Fixture class and start customizing it. Okay. So I'm just, where are the fixtures? Fill in fixtures. So I don't know if you have that there. Yes, there's this one. Okay, so in the code bank there is a URL. If you didn't go, you can go there already, and you can put into your fixture file, in your fixture service, you can put this, so it's easier to borrow and copy paste. So this, and I just need to use city highlights. Cool, good to you. Let's add everything. And now we can run and load the fixtures. Ha. Cool, so now we have the database, and the database has our fixtures inside. So we're ready to go. Yes. With some data. So we can use it. Now we can use it here. So we still have the logger. I'm going to add the CT highlight repository. Okay. So let's done that. It's in the cache. So let's put it outside of the cache system for now. There. So as you can see now, we have things loaded from the database. So you see, we did not touch any configuration until since the beginning of the workshop. So you can keep working and do code and not change the configuration when you need new services. You just type in for them. That's wonderful. So now I'm just removing the highlights. Sorry. find all. Just removing this for now. And this will need some tweak. There. So highlights, some nice highlighted name, for example. Okay. Okay, easy. Okay, let's go back. So we are just building some useless application right now. Let me continue. Let's do, I'm just moving out of my notes there to talk a bit about environment variables, and because we are starting to use them, okay? So let's play a bit with them because I think that's important on the best practice topic to get right. We have this .env file, okay? Who is using environment variables right now? Okay, great. You also, okay. So, how do you deal with environment variables in production system? In the same way, that's good.
No, I mean, that's a question. In the same way or just how you build it?
How do you do it, just in practice, in real life?
Honestly, I wouldn't use it.
Okay,
Because, right, there was my own contact. Basically, we as an industry have made a mess out of ourselves.
okay,
We like to write DDD code, we like to solve business problems, and we leave these things out in the wide open. So anybody who connects as a server can actually just dump them and have your access codes to the database or whatever else is important.
okay,
So I started using secrets from, bolts from HashiCorp.
okay. And how do you,
Yeah.
okay,
So to implement it in Symfony, it's quite easy. You just basically create a protocol to the endpoint with a token.
Mhm.
You get back what you need. And that can be revoked at any time and limited to just certain IPs and stuff like that.
okay, nice. So the topic is about secrets management and environment variables, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Any other notes? How are you using it, doing it? Who else is, how, yeah?
I also have some kind of mixture of environmental variables. Some of them lie in the vhost file.
Yes,
Some of the other ones are inside the profile of the actual user who is the web server user.
okay,
In the bash RC and the profile, and even there are some global environmental variables, for example for curl
okay.
stuff. They are also are then in the etc default slash something profile. Something.
So there are environment variables from different sources that are provided by the OS.
Yeah.
Could be global through etc,
Yeah, it could be
local to the users through
and also from
.profile. Okay, any other note on that?
There is a package, I can't remember the name, that basically has kind of like hybrid approach to what you were talking about, where all your environment variables are in document file
Yes.
but they are encrypted.
Okay,
And you provide a decryption key in some way and then it does it in the file.
okay.
I can't remember the name.
A package that does that,
Yeah.
that encrypts environment variables live.
Yeah,
It's a composer package, okay.
composer package. They haven't used it in Symfony. I need to check it out, but I know that it exists.
Okay, great. So I can tell. I don't know it. At Leap, how are you using it? Doing it? You're checking. So what's the challenge For everyone else, what's the challenge with? There are several challenges with.
Find the source. The source. I mean, in some cases it's defined in the remote. Sometimes it's.
Yeah. Okay. The source. Yeah, you're right. The source is one issue,
The actual source.
and another one is security, secrets.
Yeah, and if you're using containers,
Yeah.
for example, with Docker stack or something like that,
Yes.
when you just need to append them to that stack file, it just gets out of hand quickly.
Okay. Yes. Did anyone else figure out the difficulty of dealing with that, or?
I mean, solution. Yeah, there's some solutions, but it's just it is still a mess.
Okay, great. So let me recap for everyone so you can understand what we're talking about. So environment variables are things that are just existing in every operating system. Okay? So in Linux, you have this env command, and it lists all environment variables that are available. Let's say the path is there. I can echo the path. So it's there, it's my path, and I can echo any else. For the database URL, of course, the database URL, or let's use this one. The app env. So how do I run my application in production mode? I just set the I just run PHP with the environment variable app env set to prod. So if I do that, I'm defining a local environment variable, and I'm providing it to the env just so that I can see it. So it's in the list. So now what I can do is this. I'm not sure. Will it work? I'm not sure it works with the. Yes? Yes, it is. Cannot find driver. Ah, yes, so now I have the issue. So the issue is that we need a database URL. So we need to provide it, right? Because we are not reading this file. So this is a common thing. Where do I put my environment variables for the production environment? And sometimes you'll find many people that do want to use this file because it's so convenient to have it. But what is missing is that you need a deployment. There is a deployment process for your production system. So one step of the deployment process could be just to source this file so that now, no, did I miss something? Ah, yes, it's not exporting. Okay. How does it work? I don't remember. To export it. I'm not used to.
Yeah, source is fine, but we need to provide something relative URL for that.
This one?
And it has to be.
I don't remember, sorry. It's just there? Ah, you mean?
Yeah, sometimes I just set one folder up and then something like this.
Okay. Okay, let's do it this way. Okay, it doesn't want, anyway. So that's part of the difficulty of dealing with that. So I can do it another way, which is just, this should work. I'm not in the right folder. Bin console server. What is this? Yes. Okay, so this is another issue. Now it works. It works because we are in the prod environment, and in the prod environment there is no server bundle. And now I'm not even sure it will work. Will it work? No, it will not. And this is another reason. The reason is that the PHP-S doesn't read environment variable, doesn't expose environment variables like in a standard way. So I'm just moving that this way. So part of the difficulty with the environment variable is just this one, and I'm having the difficulties also to show you that it is difficult. So it didn't work because I need to do that also, which is to enable the bundle in all environments. So yes, I may need to disable that. And when doing so, I need to, so I can do it this way. Ha. So it's cache clear. Okay. Okay, so now we have it. And why do we have this? Where is this? Server parameters. Haha, okay. I'm going to give up. This is not production, and I should. So this is part of the difficulty with the environment variables. You need to define them, and then you need the application to have access to them. So one way is creating real environment variables. You can do that by sourcing a file. You can do that by creating them, listing them in the Docker file, for example. You can also pass them from the web server. So both Nginx, Apache, are able to give you environment variables and to configure them per virtual host. So in the virtual host definition, you can create additional variables that will be forwarded to PHP. Let's say the environment is one of them, the doctrine URL. So that's another way to deploy the environment variable. The benefit of using environment variables is that it allows an application to be reconfigured without recompiling the container. Let's say you deploy this application and you give it an IP for the URL for the database. And let's say the database, for this specific IP breaks. You don't need to redeploy the application to update it to the new location of a new database server that would be booted and started instead. Yes? Makes sense? So that's why we use environment variables, because it allows your infrastructure to tell your application where the network services are located, so that this is completely dynamic and read at runtime. When you are not using environment variables, when you're using parameters, the container is compiled with the actual parameter value right into the dumped and the compiled PHP code. It means that if you need to change the IP of the database server, you need to recompile the application. You see the difference? And by having the infrastructure take over and decide where the database server is located, you split responsibilities correctly. The infrastructure tells the app where is the database. And you can enter a world where scaling the application is done the proper way. So when you have this application, you can have proper deployment processes where, let's say, you compile the application offline. So you create the container offline, and then you deploy it if you want several times on 10 fronts, and each front can point to a different slave or master database IP, and this is all decided by the infrastructure and not by the application. Make sense? So that's why you need to use environment variables, and you need to use them for infrastructure-related configuration. So if we're talking about best practice, it's to use parameters when you need to configure the application at its behavior level. When the parameter needs to be configured, it means you are deciding what is the behavior of the application. Let's say enabling forms. Enabling forms can be controlled by a parameter, and it's not something that is going to change when the infrastructure changes itself. You enable form because your application needs forms. Okay, so parameters are for things that tell how the application behaves, and infrastructure-related configuration should be done via environment variables so that it tells the infrastructure how to connect to external services. That's the separation. There is a mistake, I think, people are doing when using Symfony 4, which is using environment variables for everything. This is not correct. You should use environment variable for infrastructure-related configuration, and you should continue to use parameters for anything else. Okay? That's not the end of the story, because there is security, which is an issue, or can be an issue at least, with this. So an environment variable is something that leaks more easily than a parameter, actually. And the reason is that since environment variables are known by the kernel, by the process, there are some default behaviors that are provided by PHP or by the kernel. One of them is, one of the things that PHP does is that when you create a sub-process, so when you call a process, when you call a command from inside a PHP application, then the process gets all the environment variables from the parent process, which means from PHP. Which means all sub-processes will get access to the secrets you have. So if you have API tokens, if you have this app secret file, if you have the database password, all of that is available in clear text to sub-processes without you telling it and asking for it explicitly. Okay? So of course you trust the process you are running, because otherwise you would not run it, but still it's something that should raise some warnings and say maybe it's not correct. Another thing that is pretty common is displaying the value of the environment variables when there is an error. It's pretty common. It's not the case in Symfony application, but it could be. I don't know which package you're going to install or which bundle. Maybe some bundle has this mistake of dumping every environment variables when there is an exception, let's say. This would be catastrophic for application. You should not dump, of course, secrets when an error happens, because leaking your secrets, is bad. Yeah? So there is an issue with secret management with plain environment variables. You can still do it if you know how the variables are going to be passed to your processes, but there are better alternatives. And in fact, when I mean better alternatives, the topic is about secrets encryption usually. So usually you'll want to encrypt your secrets, put them somewhere encrypted, and allow your application to decrypt this, so that, of course, you need the API token in clear text, so that this is transparent. I don't have any recommendation at the technical level for Symfony application today. The reason is that we don't have anything specific on this topic. Right now, there is a pull request, or at least there is an issue on the Symfony repository, which is asking and which is wondering about what we could do to help Symfony developers have something out of the box. Maybe like something like what you said, decrypting environment variables at runtime with some process, with a way to deal with updating the secrets and encrypt them while with a command to encrypt them. So I don't have that. There is a low level, not that low level mechanism, but let me show you something that allows you to build your own solution on this topic on your own. If you want to have it now and not wait for Symfony, so these are called environment variable processors. There are several that are provided by default by Symfony, and you can create your own. Let's just play with that a little bit. So back to this. Okay. Is it still running? No, it's not running. So I'm just back to my stack because I failed at this. Up. Okay, so now I have this. I have my standard application. I just want you to let's create an environment variable and let's process it so that you can know how you can figure out how it works. Up. Okay, fine. I created this. This is just a random value there. So if now I want to, let's say I want to give it to my controller or to any service. Let's do it. So let me close that. So I'm going to inject it into this one, let's say, because I think we are using it. So let's pass a token to this one. So it's a string, and it's called API token. So let's create it. And I'm going to be lazy and to just use dump to see its actual value. So if I refresh that, it will break. The reason is that we are expecting a string as an argument on the controller side, on the service, but the container doesn't know which value to provide it. Okay? So there is a fix to that, which is doing some configuration. So I'm going to open my services.yaml file. And we're going to append things at the end to allow to give some configuration. So I give it the name of the service I need to define. Highlight, what's the name? Generator. And I want to give it an argument which will be called, I'm wondering if this will work. I'm not sure. I don't think so. So I'm going to use the same way. So arguments, API token, and now this is where I'm going to tell Symfony to read the environment. So to do that, I'm referencing a parameter and referencing this name. Okay? So what this does is that it declares the service, and the only thing that it declares is that we are providing this value to the API token parameter. So now I have it, and it's there. Okay?
Only with one parameter, and only that one got injected.
Yes, so we declared only one parameter, and the other one are defined by auto-wiring. And the reason is this. We did not open this file. If you have more questions about it, we can, but right now I'm just answering your question, and the reason is that by default, every service declared into this file is going to be auto-wired, so we don't need to provide values for the arguments that can be auto-wired, which is not the case for this one, but which is the case for the other one. Nice. So now we have this value, which is great. But let's say now we want to provide this there. I don't know if key works. Let me try something. So we saw before that we can process environment variables, and this was the prefix we used, resolve. Okay? There are more. So you can read a file. So now I'm asking Symfony to read the file that is configured by this value. So now I need to change my .env file, and instead of giving it the actual API token, I can give it a file. Okay? So as you can see, we're going to need the resolve processor because we are referencing the project directory. Let's create this file. Let's change the value. Instead of 123 ABC, it's ABC 123. And now I need to add the resolve in front so I can change chain processor. So this is read from right to left. So we access this one, we process it with resolve, and the result is processed by file, which means file get content. Yeah, okay. Let me continue and I'll answer. Let me just run this one. So now we have ABC 1, 2, 3. We also have the end of the line that is added by my editor at the end of the thing. So now if you have some vault that exposes your secrets as virtual file system, done. You just need to reference them using this syntax. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. A what? Yeah. Second question. So before answering that, I'm just showing you the processor. So it's in vendor, dependency injection, and env processor.php. So there is an interface, as you can see, which is provided by the dependency injection component. So this is what you can implement if you want to create your own processor. Now there is one already, and this one contains the logic for these. So this is the full list of processors that Symfony provides. So we just used resolve. We also used file. But you can also base64 decode a string. If there is a base64 encoded value in the environment, or in the file, you can read it. You can cast. You can read a PHP constant. You can cast a value to a Boolean, because an environment variable is always a string. But if you need an int, a Boolean, you can cast it with the ball processor. CSV will split the value by commas and create an array out of it. File, we just saw that. This is casting. This is JSON decoding the value. So if you have JSON in the file, you can have file and JSON processor chained to read the file and JSON decode it. We have resolve. We know that, and this is a casting operator. There is a new one in Symfony 4.2, so you know about it. It's called key. And this allows accessing one key, one specific key in an array. So if you have a JSON, you can access one key of a JSON file and get only it as the resulting value. This is missing in 4.1, so we added it. It's not released yet, of course. So now you can create a new environment variable processor by implementing this interface and by binding it to, yeah, there is a tag for that. Maybe we can do one. Okay, do you want me to do one? Okay, so new file. Namespace first. What's the name? So this is the class we have to implement, and there is another one which is get provided types. So let's say, no, I'm not doing up. So I need to first declare the processor, and I need to declare the type of value it's going to return. 5 minutes? Okay. And then in this one, I need to change. So let me borrow from the other one. So how does it work? No. So if I'm not sure exactly what is exactly needed, but
I have a sample here because it is code bank.
yes,
Maybe or just a comment from that.
this one is not in the code bank. Maybe I'll also need this one, file. Copy pasting doesn't work well for me. I think that's it. I'm not one person. So now we need to use it in the configuration. Yes. So it's not correctly implemented. Okay, I'm not going to spend much more time on it, but anyway, just to sum up what I did. So I created this file, which is there, this one, which implements this interface. I created this, which declares the name of the prefix this handles and the type of value this will return from this method. Then there is some logic which is broken right now because there is some forwarding that doesn't work. But still, here we deal with the prefix and with the value, and we can forward it. The forwarding is broken. That's why I would need to maybe do this actually. So this is an implementation detail. Okay, now it works. That's just, I forgot to forward the value. So now we have a new processor which is able to put values in uppercase. So you can do anything you want. Connect to a console, remote thing to get the values and so on. And there's another thing, one other remark. This one, we created the class and it's already working. You know why? I'm sure you know why. Auto configuration, yeah. So there is a system which is called auto configuration. So we talked about auto wiring. Auto wiring is about figuring out what values to inject into your constructor by looking at the type int. Auto configuration is about looking at the parents and the interfaces of your services and to add behavior and to register them automatically based on the interfaces that your classes implement. So now there is a rule in the engine which tells that if something is auto-configured and it implements this interface, then it should be registered as an environment variable processor. And this is this line. I grabbed for that, but I did not tell you why. I grabbed for env var processor interface into the framework bundle because I know that's where we declare such rules. And then here there is a rule which is this one. And then here there is a rule which says register for auto configuration this interface. And let me open it. So this is the line. And as you can see, this rule means bind this interface to this tag. Whenever a service is auto-configured and implements this interface, added the tag. So it has the tag, and you don't have to declare it by yourself. Break time? If you have any question, it's time, and then break. So the default behavior, if the default behavior is just to pass the value of the environment variable unaffected.
Which is already available in the OS.
Yes.
But if you want to use your own environment variables, then you must prefix it with
How would you use your own?
.env. For example.
So it's independent. Processor and the source of environment variables are two separate things. So one thing is loading from .env or from the operating system, and processing is completely different. So you first provide the environment with where it is. So the place where .env is used is this one. So this index.php file, as you can see, there is this. And this one tells that if there is no app.env environment variable already available, then we assume that we should load it from the .env file. So if your environment provides, your operating system, your configuration system provides this app.env environment variable, then done, the .env file will not be loaded by this logic.
Yeah, so then can you come up with two examples? What happens if you do not provide the result and if you provide the result? When would we want to use it?
Yeah, okay. So let's take this one. So I'm still at the same point than before. So let's say now I'm doing this. Okay, so it doesn't exist. I get an error. So I'm referencing an environment variable that is not here. I get an error. Nice. That's first part of the answer. Second part of the answer is what happens when I have no processor. I get the raw value. So as you can see on the bottom, the resolving is not done. That's why we need to process it with resolve.
So in this case, if it were only a string value, then I don't
Exactly.
provide result.
Exactly.
Only result if I use some kind of
Exactly. Only if you need a parameter into it. Yeah, if you have a parameter and you want it to be resolved. So by default, many environment variables are just fine this way. Let's say, for example, the app secret.
It's already visible, so you don't need to put that.
You just need the raw value, so it's there.
And is there any built-in in the stuff that, for example, uses one service and a method which returns its value, and then it returns its value as an environmental variable? So we have a service which returns some kind of value.
No, there is no such service that reads the environment. You need to reference by using this kind of parameters. This is the way to do it. There is no service to do it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I'm back to this. So we have this environment variable processor. What else? So for environment variables, here we are. So use parameters, and for environment infrastructure related configuration, use environment variables, and only for that. Next steps. Who tried already API platform? Who knows what it is? Yeah. So we can. I'm just going to use it just to show you. I think it's a best practice to use it. If you're doing APIs, you really want to use API platform. So there is an alias, which is this one. So we are requiring API. I need to enable the network, I suppose. No, it's okay right there. Yes. Okay, so what's next? Your API is almost ready. Create your first API resource in source entity. Browse to /API. I'm not going to enable GraphQL support. I could. So if I go to /API, I have something. No operation defined in spec. So git status gives me some things. So these are the things that okay, yeah. Not only Twig modify, not only Flex modified this. I have a route here. This route is what gives the /API URL a behavior of type API platform, which is provided by API platform. I'm just slowly entering the topic, and then let me open the entity. So API platform allows exposing your entities very easily. So I'm going to need to expose it. So there is this one. This class is actually an annotation you can add on your entities, for example. And what it does is that it labels this class as something you want to expose on the API. So now I have a REST API to play with the database and with city highlights. So we have a model which is read from the annotations with the name, the description. I can get this. So this is really, really, really nice. ID, I don't. So if we run this, or if we request this URL, yes, but I'm not sure if this is the ID of my thing. Okay, so here it is. So right now there is no, what's the ID of my thing? I don't know. Is there a browser? I don't remember. Yes, this one. So, as you can see, we have. So right now we are using some admin interface or a API client, but actually I could do exactly this call and get the JSON which lists all my entities, which is what I'm asking for by going to the city highlights. I'm not going to dive much deeper into API platform, but I just want you to know that it's awesome. It's awesome because we just created this entity, we described its schema, it works also with relations, and then we have an API which gives us, I don't know if I can open the browser, which gives us a JSON that is much more than just the JSON we could create manually, by creating some array and JSON encoding it. Because this one is aware of many standards that exist already, and one of them is JSON LD. So this one is encoded according to JSON LD. So it means it has relationships embedded, and this is something you really want in your API, but that is just so boring to create manually. So API platform does all the heavy job for you, and you should use it, really. If you need APIs, just use that. That's all on API platform. Yes, so we can do that. Okay, so just to show you, we had, just adding everything. So now I have this snapshot, so I can unpack API. As told you, it's great to know what are your transitive dependencies, or at least to make your transitive dependencies not transitive anymore. So now we did this. And the benefit also of unpacking something is that it makes it just possible to remove a part of the pack. So in this case, we removed this one. We removed actually the pack. Yes, this one, API pack. And now we can, let's say, remove this one. So if you don't want to deal with cross-origin things and you don't need the bundle, fine, we just did that. If you were to use only packs, it would not be possible. So that's another reason to use unpack, to just have more fine-grained dependencies in your JSON file. So now we have what we need. So as you can see, Flex figured out that we do not need the course bundle recipe anymore. So we just removed that part from the .env file, and then let's keep that. Same for the configuration, it removed the file. And same for the Symfony log, telling you that this recipe is not applied anymore. Okay, so a great value also there. Flex knows how to disable something, which is actually quite hard, because every documentation on any package tells you how to install something, but if you want to uninstall something, you have to read it reverse, which is sometimes hard. So that's another thing. Okay, so for the small application, there are more things like dealing with relations and so on, but for the best practice part, I think I'm done with that. I have some slides just to be sure we stay on the topic. Just give me some Just trying this. Rereading my notes. Remove course, we just did that. Entity, we're not going to do relations because it's... Okay, so let me show you some slides, if you don't mind. I'm going through them quickly because we already saw, I think, most of them, but there are things that I'm not going to use into my application and that are still best practices. So if you want the full list of best practices, then it's somewhere there. Hop. I don't know if you figured out before, but there is a book which is on the documentation page. So there are some pages, these, which are called the Symfony best practices. We try to keep them up to date to latest version. So it's up to date for Symfony 4. So you'll find most of the things I told you. Not all of them, because I think I told you a bit more things than what's inside. And there are more things inside also. So it's 40 pages. You can read it. And it covers all of these topics. So these slides are extracted from the book, from the PDF I just showed you. So let's go. Let's go. I'm going fast. If I'm going too fast, if you have any question, you just stop me and we'll talk. Okay? Because this is the last hour or something together. So it's time to, again, discuss about anything I did not talk already and you're wondering or things like that. So how do we create a Symfony project? We use Composer and we use Flex actually. Don't try using, you can use Symfony and cherry pick your components. It's really, really fine. I would always recommend to use Flex. It's so nice, as you can see. Be careful with what I told you at the beginning. Composer Global requires Symfony Flex because you will forget to update it and you may run outdated version of Flex doing so. So don't forget that you did that, and sometime if you need to, do Composer Global update, and this will update the Flex source code to the latest version of Flex. And this will not happen by using only the dependencies of your local projects. Okay? So don't forget about that. Check requirements. That's something that can save you some hours debugging why some things don't work. So there is a requirement checker. You can use it in any DOPT, and then you can run this command, which checks that you have the proper Symfony version, that you have the extension, the base extension, the required ones, installed, and your PHP ini settings are sane. So don't forget that this command exists and this package exists so that you can save some time. So for the layout, I did not insist on it, but there is no app bundle anymore. If you're used to using and to having a bundle in your application, that's not needed anymore. I mean app bundle. I'm not talking about bundle in the vendor directory. So we are still using, and bundles are really the way to go to have shared features packed together, but only in the vendor directory. Don't create a bundle for your application. It doesn't need to have a bundle anymore. It used to for technical reasons, but it's not needed. So that's the reason why. Use the app namespace. You can, okay, some people resist this, just, we don't care. That's not, the name is not that important. So save yourself some time and help also your team by having only one namespace. It's easy to figure out where things are located. So this is the new layout of Symfony 4 applications. So we have config, which replaces the app/config folder that you may have used before. Bin console, bin for every script you might need to use. var, cache logs sessions. The source templates. vendor public. Public is for assets and for the entry point index.php file. So in the source folder, you put all your classes according to PS of 4, and then the rest, I think, is pretty obvious. If you need to override a template from a bundle, it's easy. It's template slash name of the bundle slash the name of the template with the directory. So it's easy. It's still easy to overwrite the default template and the template provided by a bundle, and to have a customized version of it. Yep. So configuration, we talked extensively, I think, about that. So obvious. I mean, now it is obvious. So use environment variables for the infra. I did not, yeah. So if you want to have a special value for the database for your tests, you need to define them in the php.xml.dist file. I did not install PHP units. It would be a best practice to have tests, of course. So by installing PHP unit, you'll get this file, and this one contains also values that will be used to define the database to use for loading fixtures and so on. So don't forget about it. That's where you configure your testing environment, your test environment. So for production, use real environment variables, put secrets in files, which could be a mounted virtual file system that you access with the file processor. You know how to do that now. So some example, let's move on. Okay, let's move on. So locally, you would use .env and php.xml, or if you need to tweak it for your dev environment, usually you don't need it. The dist file is fine. And don't commit .env, just commit these two. For the application, use the config/services.yaml file. There used to be a file called config/parameters.yaml. Now we have just one file, and it's services.yaml. And in services.yaml, despite the name, you can still create parameters. And this is a new parameter value that then you can reference in other parts of the application like that. You can do that. Let me show you that. But of course, you can do that just to show you some indirection, maybe cleaner configuration. So you can do that. You create a parameter which is called API token, which is defined by this, and then there you do that, and that's fine. Okay? I would recommend to create this and to not reference env directly in the service below. So that, because the fact that it's read from the environment is totally independent from the fact that this is what is injected there. So by having this indirection, you make it more obvious. And you can give it a name also. And change, okay. Yes. So that's the same. So it was implicit and did not insist on it. For vendor, so libraries and bundles, sorry, I'm switching from the VM from inside to outside. So you have services there, that's for you, and you have packages, and packages is for everything that is in the vendor directory. There is usually, one file per library or bundle that needs some configuration, So API platform 1, doctrine 2, etc. So this is the routing component configuration. We have strict requirement disabled. And then if you need specific configuration per environment, there are subfolders. So these are loaded last so that they take over any previous configuration done by these files. So for example, is there any, so yes, routing. So routing has this as default, and then when we are in dev environment, we turn strict requirements to true. Okay? Yeah?
How do you deal with parameters which are not server dependent, so they shouldn't go to the environment variables? They are not environment specific, so they shouldn't go to dev or prod or test, but they are database instance specific. So, for example, various entity IDs and so on.
Do you have
For example, you have development environment, but each developer on his own computer has an own instance of database which has different entity IDs for some certain tasks or something.
I would say it depends.
I mean, we handled that before with the parameter handler, with the incentive parameter handler.
Yes.
So now it's removed from Symfony Core.
Yes.
What would be the best practice to do that?
Maybe,
It can go with the environment variables, obviously, but then it pollutes the environment. It's not server-based. It's not server configuration.
yes, yeah, I understand. So maybe what you could do is have another configuration file that you'd create next to this one, and this one could import it. So-
Obviously, it should not be. It should be git ignored. So basically, you get the
Exactly.
incentive parameter handler once again.
Yeah. So you could have, so there is no replacement for the incentive parameter package. So I think you could do it this way. So by referencing there a file that is not committed, so that would be the way to override configuration and to have a separate file to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Would make sense?
Yep.
Because this still works.
Yeah, and it will obviously crash if the file is not there. So yeah.
Yeah. So we need some process to say, oh, you forgot to do that. Maybe you can use the incentive parameter for that. We,
I tried, but then you have two ways of dealing with the parameters. So it's not
yes, yeah. So you need to understand the reason of each
yeah.
and be sure that people do also in the team, and then select the correct way of configuring
Yeah.
each. Yeah. Exactly. So. Okay. So yes, just on the topic, just to close it. So this is for packages. Now you may wonder, and it's not maybe not obvious, but if you need specific configuration for your own services, you can do it also. And the way to do it is by having this underscore file. So this one will be loaded, and it will be the last one loaded for the dev environment only. Okay? So if I need dev specific for packages, it's in a folder, and for your own services is by having this underscore dev file. So it's not obvious, it's not visible there, so you need to know it. Or you can figure out by yourself, because this is just coded here. There is just the kernel.php file is the place where we configure the way configuration is loaded. So I'm not going to spend time on it, but if, so it's yours, we committed that. So you can change that if you want. Better not, because having the same default for everyone makes sense. When new developer enter your team, they will know how the layout works. But as you can see here, this line, specific line, loads the service underscore environment file last. That's where I know, or I can discover that this file can exist, and I can create it and populate it with some dev-specific configuration. Okay? Yeah, sometimes this is something we added as a best practice by experience. We see that we saw many projects where people are defining so many parameters for things that would be just fine as PHP constants. So PHP constants are nice, just use them. There's no need to have some way to configure them in many cases, so just use constants and done, if you don't need to actually change the value anytime. So use constants. So let's say, for example, this example is on the home page. If you want 10 items per page, you can make this 10 a constant and not necessarily a parameter. How many times in the life of the product will you change the value? I'm sure never. And if you do, it's fine updating the constant value most of the time. So just save yourself some interaction there. Semantic configuration, just don't use it. So semantic configuration, if you remember, is something that you can do in a bundle to allow people to use what we do, in fact, in all the packages files. So semantic configuration in the doctrine bundle is the thing that declares and makes it possible to configure all these settings and have it turned into some wiring dependency injection configuration. In your application, you don't need that. It's a class you would have to maintain. So bugs, instead just configure services and parameters at the low level as services, like this does and done. So don't use semantic configuration. Don't spend time on it. If you want it, it means you might have some reusability issue. So split maybe that as a bundle, make the bundle a specific package as a real bundle, and require it in your bundle directory. So this is how you declare configuration. This is for bundle. Let me skip that. So for business logic, so everything that is your business. So now it says not controllers and routing. For routing now you can do that, but just move everything into the source folder. That's what we did all the day, so I'm sure this is obvious. So just use the SRC folder to put your files. Use the fully qualified class name to name your services. That's what is done automatically for you. The default configuration, the services.yaml file, contains the rules that make it the default. So if we look at this and if we understand what all this means, especially this one, tells to load everything in the source folder as a service, and the name of every service that is created or are created from this rule will use the name of the class as the name of the service. So this is done for you, and if you need to create new services, and if you don't need several instances of the same class, then use fully qualified class names. Of course, there are many cases where the same class can be declared and can be used to create several different services. In this case, this rule doesn't work. Let's say you need several file system cache pools. You need to give a name to each, a separate name to each file system adapter instance. So for the cache system, it's done by default for you, so you don't need to figure out but to care about it, but it could be in any case. So this is the example.
It can be.
So the benefit is what we saw in the morning, is that you can get the service quite easily using PHP shortcuts, aliases. So this alias is nice. We have the use at the top of the file, and then we reference with : class. It's really easy and works really well with PHP Storm and auto-completion. Use YAML to define services. Obvious. We did that all day long.
Just a last question. Now it has changed, the extension has changed from Y
Yes.
to YAML. What's the reason?
So what's the reason for having .yaml instead of .yml? Yes, there is a reason, and the reason is standards. The YAML specification has a few lines about this topic, and the standard way to name YAML files is .yaml. It's not .yml. That's the reason. I know that Travis is .travis.yml and not YAML. But since we want to have to be more standard by default, we did this change for this reason. Because it's just written in the specification. There's no other reason. And in fact, it will work also without the A. So yes, don't use XML. Obvious. You see the reason. You could use PHP. I would not recommend it. And then, of course, YAML is nice. Yes, so this is an old best practice. I mean, old recommendation. We used to have parameters to configure the name, the class of the service that implements some service. So we used to have logger.class, and this being defined as the value of the class parameter of the logger service ID. Don't do that anymore. I'm not sure it's clear enough, but if it's not, we don't care because we don't have this. It's not used anywhere anymore. So if you create this, if you have this crazy idea of doing that, I don't know why you would do that. So in case you're wondering, don't use parameters to define the class of your services. But you don't declare your services anymore. So doctrine entities. Use annotations to define doctrine entities mappings. There are other ways, but by having annotations, you have locality. So you have the code and the annotation at the same place. It's obvious. And in your team, everyone will figure out very easily where the mapping is declared. It's in the entity file. If you split it with some XML or PHP mapping declaration in some other file, it means people will, when opening your project, they will have some time figure out how and why you moved this in another place. So just use annotations. They are nice. They work well. So we did that with the maker bundle generator. For controllers, the rule is the same. So the first rule is that a controller should not contain any business logic. So make it really a thin layer. So keep controllers simple. Move everything that is business logic into dedicated files. Yes, 5 variables, 10 actions, 20 lines per action. Don't go over this. Okay? So that's obvious, but it's very, very easy to make an action grow, and do business logic instead. So try to refactor and to make your controllers just wiring. Yes, make controller extend the base abstract controller. You know that already. It's going to be the only way and the only provided base controller in Symfony 5 because we deprecated the controller class. So these are the methods that you can use when extending an abstract controller. Use annotation to configure routing, cache, HTTP cache, and security. So we did use annotation already for our routing. This is the configuration that is shipped by Flex to enable annotation support for your controllers. This app bundle is old. I should update the slide. So yes, just add route and the route declaration there. There is something which is also old on this slide, which is the namespace of the route annotation. We moved the route annotation into the routing component. So now you don't need the framework extra bundle to have routes work. Let me just focus on that topic there. We have at route, but as you can see now, it's in this namespace. Okay? It's not in the slide, but use inline configuration when it makes sense. So the way to do that is, I can't remember actually, but if you do that, you can declare a default here, of course. But if you have requirements saying that this must match some value, I can't remember, but it might be something like that, saying the city must be only words. So this might be the syntax, might not. You can do this in line using that. Okay? And I think it's there. So this is nice. It allows you in one line, one compact line, to express the requirements for your parameters. Just use it. Yeah, just wanted to be sure. So this is the way to declare things. So both the default and the requirements, and this is much more verbose than doing this, which is the same. Yep. So if you did not know about it, use it. It's better. So for controllers, nothing special. Don't use a template. So if you're using this shortcut, just don't use it. Make everything explicit and use the render helper. It's much more explicit. You tell to the reader where the template file is. With add template, there is a rule. I cannot remember it, to infer and to deduce the name of the twig file from the controller name and the method name, but this is just impossible to remember correctly 100% of the time. So just use that instead. This render default slash index.html.twig, for example, and done. It will remove some magic from. So use param converters for simple requests. So this is a nice feature. When you have entities, you can type in for the entity on the action. I'm sure you already know about that. Just use it. It will map the ID parameter to the entity that has this ID and that matches the type hint. So that's so nice to use. If you want, I didn't show you, but just to make it clear and be sure, there is one very nice use case of type hinting services in your action. It's for repositories. Because here, let's say we are dealing with cities highlights directly in the controller. It's easy. We just do that. And now we have this repository and we can do things with it. Okay? If we want to do that, or call any other method, of course, of the repository, done. In a few characters, we have access to the repository to get entities via it. So, yeah. Yes, that's just showing with and without. Oh, yeah, so the boilerplate. Now you can do better than that since you can get the repository by just type hinting it. Yeah, okay, so this is just a reminder that you can map a parameter to use it to the correct entity by using this annotation. So there is add param converter. By default, if you don't declare, so if you do this, the param converter will use the parameter that has the name ID, this ID parameter, this exact name, and it will use the type hint as the name of the entity class to create them. That's not always the thing to do. Maybe you want, instead of the ID, some slug in the URL. So then you need to tell to the param converter which or how to map the converter, the parameter name, to some method to create the entity. So this is what this does. It maps the post slug from the URL to the slug method to create the post parameter that is here. Okay? So it's nice. You just tell that and it will map automatically the URL to the entities. Templates, what do we have? Don't write templates in PHP, use Twig. So it's done just exactly for templating. It's secure because it does escaping for you. Put all templates in templates. We did that together. So many recommendations are just the default, so you don't have to wonder about that. Yeah, but the name, by having things in templates, you save yourself some ugly conventional syntax you may be used to use. So this colon magic referencing some templates, so now you don't need that anymore. Forms. Yeah, so say you can, of course, so the best practice is to declare the forms in separate classes. Instead of using the form builder directly in the controller, it's better to create a class, have it build the form, and then use that directly in your classes. You don't need to create the button in the form files. So on the PHP side, you just, instead to create the button, just use HTML. Okay? Input, type, and submit, something like that. So no need to pollute the PHP side with that. Just as a reminder, but you have no choice now, you need to double check your forms. So you first need to handle the request, of course, but then to check if it is submitted, which means it's a post request and a few other things, and if it's valid per the declaration of the form, and if both conditions are true, then you can deal with the content and the body of the post payload, of the form payload actually in this case. Yep. So that if you want very specific error handling, you can have a different page when the form is submitted but the data is not valid, or when the form is just not submitted. If you want, that's why we have two separate checks. So things we are not going, so let's continue the catalog of the best practices we have in the best practices book about localization, internationalization. If you need that, yeah, you need that. Okay? Because the world doesn't speak your language. There are so many people that don't speak your language that I'm sure at some point you'll, as a developer, work with a business that will need more languages than English or anyone. So to enable, this is just a reminder, to enable the translation subsystem, you need to declare local. You need to enable it in the configuration system. So this is a way to have basic configuration and have the English version be the default, if that's what you want. Now you need to declare mappings. The best practice here would be to use xlif, which is a standard, to map and to have the translation thing. So the reason is that XLIF is a standard published by a worldwide, a global standardization organization. It's based on XML, which means it's not editable by you. At least it's boring. But since it's a standard, it has a tooling on its own. So there are editors for this format, and they work well. And more importantly, they work well with the people whose business is doing translations. Because you maybe, I'm sure at least the developer are not the one that are able to translate your application in all the languages that you want to provide. So you have translators whose main business is doing and using this. So these people have tools, and these tools use XLIF to persist the translation. So this is how it looks. I don't have any slide on this, but I've seen talks specific that from people that do heavy and that do a lot of translations, and their recommendation is that at some point, and earlier the better, that's their recommendation, you should use some external service to deal with translations. What I mean is some SaaS, there are many SaaS providers that provide editors for translators so that translators can work online in a web UI. They get all the messages that they have to translate. They use that to translate the application, and then they have an API so that you can very easily populate your own application with the work from translators. And from their experience, I don't have much experience on this topic, but from their experience, it's even better to use SaaS provider to work with translators. So this would be a best practice on top of this best practice. If you don't need it, fine, but don't forget that it works really well from people that do it a lot. So there is no translations folder right now, but this is where you need to put your translation files. So the name is like that, domain.local.xlif. Okay? So this is the basic layout. Just use it. It works with the commands and so on. Then you need to, of course, this is just a reminder how to use the messages, but you have in Twig, you have several helpers to get the translation for some message. So message pipe trans, and you get the translation for the message. I'm not going to talk much about that, but you know that messages, there can be several messages or several plural form per message. So if you need an S at the end of some word because there are one apple and two apples, there is this trans choice system which allows you to select automatically apple or apples based on the number.
Complex architecture.
Why do we need to provide the number? It's because not every language has only singular and plurals. There are many more languages in the world, and people are creative, and part of this creativity is having several plural systems. So when there are 0, 1, or 2, there can be different ways to express that in different languages. So in your application, you need to abstract that, and this is the way to do it. Trans choice, and you pass the number of items that should, that are corresponding to the message. What kind of key should you use there? Use keys, abstract keys, generic keys, instead of, English. So the example is this one. So on the top, we have title.post_list. This is a key. You can, by name, know what it is. You could also do post list, which is the actual value that you have by default, okay? And if you work with the second solution using strings, it's nice because by default, in your view as a developer, you have things you can read. It's plain English and the UI
Factory
is
methods
nice.
produces an abstract
If you use keys,
text but delegates the real instantiation.
if you use keys, you have only title.post_list at this place, which is a bit less nice to the developer. But if you have a typo in the strings version, it means you cannot change it without breaking all your translation catalogs that you already built. And when you have thousands of messages in this catalog, it can be a nightmare to just fix this kind of typo. Okay? So that's why we recommend to use, and you should really use keys and not strings when doing translations.
But the concrete
Okay, so let's talk about security. So define only one firewall with the anonymous option enabled. It makes no sense to have different firewalls with anonymous navigation enabled. So just make the default /URL be the anonymous one, and the logged in access rules be on the other one.
frameworks.
Yeah, okay, most applications. So that's the reason. I'm going fast on this because, okay, that just may be a bit boring to read them all. So as you can see here, we have the definition for the slash pattern. So it means all routes are anonymous with the form login path defined there. Okay, I'm moving this because this is just documentation on how to use security. Password security, you have read about that before. Never ever store your password or the password of your user as plain text. And never use MD5 or SHA-1 or SHA-256 to encode the password because these are missing the salt property. And more than that, they are computationally, so they are easy to compute today with CPU or GPU power that you can run quite easily. So instead, use algorithms that have been created to prevent brute force attacks against a hashed password. So bcrypt is one. There is a new one, which is Argon. There are several versions of it, but it's more recent than bcrypt. Use Argon if you want. Use bcrypt as the minimum way to check passwords. You have to know that bcrypt and Argon are slow to verify. It means that when people log in to your form system, they will have to wait for the verification to happen. Because this is how bcrypt works. Bcrypt works by making it slow to verify the password so that you cannot brute force the verification itself and brute force the password. Which means you cannot verify the password at every single request. That's just impossible because it's too slow and you would just crash your servers. So that's why we use sessions, of course. And that's also why we use tokens on API, because tokens has just compared using strings. I've seen this mistake sometimes. People using the token and comparing some bcrypt version of it. So yeah, that's what I just told. So to do that, you need to configure the security encoder to bcrypt. That might be the default. Let me check. I'm just checking the default configuration. Maybe the security bundle. Okay, it's not there at least. Okay, it's not there. I don't know. But yes, okay, the reason is obvious. It's because we don't know the entity class and the user entity class, or the user class for the security, which is more good.
The object will be injected.
Which could be a good idea to add to the maker bundle. Let me note that. On the security topic, you might today be using your user entity
In fact,
also as the user provided to the security layer. I'm sure you do. So it might not always be the best idea, because maybe the user is a big object with a big dependency graph or big graph connected to all your entity graph, and serializing it into the session might be just something that you should not do, because the graph should not be serialized there, and the user entity might be too heavy. Another thing is that it's pretty complex to deal with the form, creating a form login page, creating the logout logic and logout page, and redirection in case of access error and so on. So there are a lot of things you need to do to have a correct security subsystem right now in Symfony. There is a bundle which is called FOSS user bundle. Who is using FOSS user bundle? Okay. So we are trying to move out of FOSS user bundle because it's not extensible. I mean, you start with it, it's, oh, wow, cool, great, it works. And then you want to make it something a bit different, a bit more customized for your logic, and then you have to rewrite everything. So that's FOSS user bundle. So instead, and it's something that Ryan created the pull request for, I think, yesterday, we are trying to create a make user command. And this make user command asks what you want to do actually for the security user. So this will be the recommended way to create a user for the security system. And it's going to be nice because I know Ryan does an amazing job. So let's continue on that. And I want to be sure that the make user command does something about bcrypt now. That's what I want. That's why I'm not in there. So access control, okay, that's for the configuring the firewalls, add security for your annotations in the action on top of the action as an annotation. So where you can give fine-grained rule. Okay. So yeah, from all these alternatives, I would say don't use access control lists. As you know, or maybe you did not notice, but we deprecated at least we did not deprecate it, but we moved it into a separate component. The security ACL component was into Symfony before. It's out of Symfony now. That's because we think that access control lists are useful for a very few cases, and many people used it while they were just fine with voters. So use voters to create custom logic to grant access or not to your to any part of your application that needs access control or decision of any kind. So use access control and the add security annotation when possible. There is something that is deprecated on this slide. So this tells add security has role admin. This is deprecated. What is deprecated is has a role. Has a role has a better alternative, which is granted. So is granted is provided by the extra bundle, Sensio Framework extra bundle. It's also separately provided by API platform. It's not in core, at least not in stable versions. And now it is. In Symfony 4.2, it will be in core. So API platform and framework extra bundle will not have to redeclare or create it for the annotation. So now it's is granted role admin, and it will just work where this has role helper doesn't work because it doesn't have access to the authentication checker because of some internal way it's working, which is broken. So use @security is granted role admin, and I'm sure you already have is granted because of the extra bundle or API platform. Of course, you can do more complex expressions into, let's say, annotations. So user.get email, so you can verify very simply that the post can be edited only by its author with such rules. So that's why it's nice. Yeah, so just a warning, don't forget to also add the logic in the templates. So if there is an edit button, it's very easy to add the logic, but don't forget to add it next to the edit button. You need to do this if in Twig to not display the edit button to people that don't have access to it. Okay, otherwise they will click on the button and they will get a 403. Use voters. Avoid access control lists. Okay, let's talk quickly about that. So we used to use ascetic for everything that is related to assets. So assets is CSS, JavaScript, and images. They were in resources public of each bundle. Now we just want you to put your assets into the public folder. Okay, so just put JavaScript, CSS files, images there, and just reference them using this asset function. So if you use asset, css/bootstrap.css, it will look in the public /css/bootstrap.css file and create the URL for you. And it will also create the version, if you need it, at the end of the URL so that you can have precise control over the HTTP cache system. So that's why it's nice and it's easy. Use Encore. Who tried Encore, Webpack Encore already? Great. So if you didn't, you should give it a try. So Webpack is a program that is written in JavaScript and that needs Node.js to run, but this is technology, we don't care. What matters is that Webpack knows how to compile CSS and JavaScript and many other languages into things that the browser understands, which means compiling several JavaScript files together, requiring modules for the front end, and so on. So it's much better than ascetic for this task, so just use it. And the Webpack is complex and difficult to configure. That's why there is a Symfony component, which is the only Symfony component that is not in PHP, which is called Webpack Encore. And Webpack Encore is a JavaScript helper and configuration builder for Webpack. So it provides a few methods on the configuration object to make it easier to enable jQuery, to enable TypeScript, to enable SAS parsing, to enable all things that are needed to manage assets. The integration between Encore and Webpack, between Webpack and Symfony, is very light and there is no need for anything else. It's just a manifest.json file. So when you run Webpack, it will create, when we will run Webpack Encore, it will create a manifest.json file, and this file contains a map of the assets of your application and some hash of its content. And this is used by Symfony to create URLs that are updated whenever the content of the JavaScript or the CSS file changes, which means from the HTTP cache point of view, it works really well because it kills the cache when the content of the JavaScript or the CSS file changes. Is it clear or is it too fast? If you have a question, you can ask. If it was not clear, you can ask also. So that's another best practice. Of course, you need to have tests. And this best practice is about creating a test, a functional test, to just check that the pages you want to have return an OK status code, 200 status code. This is obvious. Maybe if you do that, so this is the example. So this is some code you can copy paste into your application. You can create a test case, and this test case could be just that. Let's create a client. Let's get the URL that is provided, and just check that the response is successful. Successful means 200 as a HTTP status code. Then you list URLs there, and that's it. If you do that, I promise you that you will spot some mistakes before they go to production, just thanks to that. This is a functional test. It's very high level. It will not tell you why. You'll have to inspect. When you have a failure, you'll have to inspect why the response is not successful. There will be some garbage there with some error stack or some error message. I don't know. It depends. But at least you will know that this page is broken badly. This will happen. So you can save yourself some hours doing that. Yeah, so for the functional test, just use the hard-coded way. So don't get through generation. It creates another layer of indirection, which means it can hide some mistakes in the router generation configuration by resolving things. And this is the last best practice I have on this slide. Do you have any question?
I have a question based on the topic we had before about placement of the entity.
Yeah.
So it's mostly in one static folder, kind of folder where all the entities are created for the database.
So yes, the entity folder is a static folder.
It's a folder at one particular place.
Yes.
But some people, for example, like to model it, let's say there is a folder under SRP or
Yeah.
model,
Yeah.
and if there's a user table, basically user table, and there is the entity, repository, service classes for whatever action you are doing, like changing password, registration, or whatever.
Okay.
How can we make it work like that so it can be modifiable, that entities go in separate folder?
I don't think there is a special thing about that. The maker, so how can you change the layout and the namespaces of the entities? Yeah? So I think at some point it's up to you. You need to change that. I think the maker bundle has this opinion of putting them in the entity. It's just a generator, so once the file is generated, it's up to you to move it somewhere else.
So I can create one file on my own without the docker command, and it will work.
Of course. Yeah. So about generators, they are just helpers. You don't need them. You can just code everything by yourself. You can copy paste from some old files and take inspiration from it. That's what we do actually since always, before the common generation existed. So yeah, just do it by hand. It works well, and the generation is just a helper. Yeah. So here you can see we have entity, and we have this repository sub namespace also. Any other question? At what time are we supposed to finish? In 5 minutes, really? Okay. Did I meet your expectation today? Yeah? If not, you can come to me and tell me after, if you don't want to say no. If you want to, if you want me to show you anything, we still have a few minutes. So if we want to go deeper into any question, any topic, any, tell me.
One has something that I also have some kind of edge case.
Okay.
So, for example, I require the translator.
Yeah.
My Symfony Flex. And that created a file in the configuration called translation environment.
Yeah.
But since all the translation parameters are also part of the framework parameters, there is some kind of overlap. For example, the default locale is also defined in the framework YAML file, which is then headed by the flyer in Symfony framework bundle.
Mm-hmm.
But for the translation, it's also there in the configuration, and I always wonder which one would take precedence.
So how does,
Suppose we require translate now, and then you can see what I mean. Translation or translator, I don't know which one.
yes, you're right, I don't know. Maybe there is an alias for it. Would be great to have it, if not. It works. No? Does it? We already have it? Okay, we have it already. So now you're saying we have packages.
Exactly, and it also has default locale, but if you also inspect the framework YAML file in this same folder, it also has a default locale at the top, which is uncommented. And yeah, it's kind of like an overlap. So why, yeah, so is this default locale used actually anywhere else? And if yes, then how Symfony Flex deals with it?
Okay. Yeah, I see your question. So how can we, why are there several local configuration in several components, and how do they overlap? And
Yeah, and then if there's a conflict, which one takes precedence?
so from what I see, I don't have the answer, but we're going to look at it. From what I see, these are different settings. So maybe they configure different things. Maybe. So there's only one way to know. So this one is, okay, this one is framework default local this way.
That's also the same framework default locale. So that's exactly the same parameter.
Okay, you're right. Maybe we should remove one of them. Actually, I don't know, but I think in this case I don't have the answer because, or the answer would be alpha ordering, because I think we are loading files in alpha order, which is very fragile, and I don't think that's. So in this case, I would recommend you to decide and say this one is not ready. So there is some ordering, and I think it's alpha order for packages, but this is not reliable enough and not discoverable enough. So yeah, that's it. So the way.
It does well, but I was just wondering whether
Yeah, you're right. I think maybe we should remove one of them. I don't know why we have default local there.
perhaps this default locale is also used somewhere else inside the framework.
You know that you have the source code in Symfony, so you can.
Yeah, the console also depends.
So what this does is that it just populates this one. So I don't know why. Okay, it's strange. I don't have the better answer right now. I don't know why we have it in both locations. Ah, yes, maybe doing this. So it looks like the default local is injected into the translation system, and in other. So in this case, I would say that when you are using translation, you need a default local. That's why it's in the recipe. But you can also have it injected into other parts that might need, especially this one. So this is a translation update, so it's related to translation again. And this is the local listener. Do you know what it is? What does it do?
They just that's the current local based on the request into the request value object.
So it's,
It's an event.
yes, it's this. So it sets the default local, which is not that useful at this moment, but could be if you don't use translation. So that's the only place where it's useful. Yeah, maybe. Actually, I think we should fix the recipe so that it's clear where it's declared and where it's not. More questions? So, I was thinking about. Do you remember the URL for feedback?
Events, Netgen IO.
This one?
I think you need to log in from the link in the email.
Okay. Okay, so don't forget to give feedback. Thank you.